there are ways that they can do it. A lot of luck needs to fall their way, and I've put together 3, I guess, reasons on how I think they can win the Premier League. Starting with number 1 is they absolutely cannot lose key players. And I've mentioned here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players that I have on this Tottenham team who Spurs just can't afford to lose. And number 1 at the top of that list is their now captain, Heung. He is their talisman, and I don't think Spurs will be the way that they have been over the past, 6, 7 seasons where they relied on Harry Kane to score all those goals. I think it'll be a lot of scoring by committee. You'll get goals from James Maddison, from Son, some hopefully from Richarlison. We'll get on to him, Kulusevski. There are players on this side who can score goals, and they've proven to do so. Even the fullbacks, the wingbacks, Destiny Udogie and Pedro Porro, you're going to get some goals, obviously, from set pieces with Romero and Mickey Van de Ven. But I think most of the goal-scoring load is going to fall on Son. And it looks like with Richarlison not being that true number 9 that Tottenham want to be, Son is going to be playing through the middle more often times than not. He's off to a fantastic start. And let's not forget, this guy won the Golden Boot just a couple of seasons ago. People dismissed him, I think, a little bit heading into this season because of the poor season he had last year. But we found out that he was dealing with a hernia issue that he later got operated on during the offseason. So there's a reason why he kind of fell off last season with Tottenham Hotspur. I don't expect that to happen. And the reason also why they can't lose this guy, there's no like-for-like replacement. Like I mentioned, they want Richarlison to be that guy, but he's dealing with some mental health issues. He's never really hit the ground running with Spurs. We know he's capable of doing it. We saw it at Everton. We saw it at the World Cup. Brazil's number 9, and I think he was a leading scorer for Brazil. So he has that ability, and the manager, Big Ange Postecoglou, has given him that confidence and allows him to play. But over time, I think throughout this season, I don't imagine that he's going to score 10 to 15 goals for Spurs. And that's a big issue considering they paid $60 million for him, and they were looking for someone to back up Harry Kane and then eventually replace Harry Kane. I don't think Richarlison is that guy. So it's going to be Son. The majority of the goals are going to come through Son, and they absolutely cannot lose them. Depth is an issue with Tottenham, and that's all over the pitch, including the 10 spot, the 10 position, which is where James Maddison plays. And I always want to say this off the top. Penny for penny, he might be the best transfer in the Premier League this season. He's been so good, and under this Ange Postecoglou system, they're a very attacking side, but you need a playmaker in the middle to make everything work and make everything tick. And he's so good at finding those spaces in between defenders and threading balls into Son, Richarlison, Kulusevski, Brendan Johnson, Manor Solomon. Whoever's in that front 3, Maddison can get that player the ball. And if you want him to score, you can do that as well. Just give him half a yard outside the box and you can put the ball into the top corner. His delivery from set pieces, fantastic. Both feet as well. And similar to Son, unfortunately for Maddison, there's no like-for-like replacement. Spurs haven't had a true number 10 like that dating back to Christian Eriksen. That was a long time ago. They hope that maybe Gio Lo Celso was that guy. He really hasn't hit the ground running, hasn't played much this season. There were rumors that he's going to be on his way out. Then his agent came out and said, I want to stay here. So I don't know if Postecoglou believes in Lo Celso. If he does, and he's going to give him a run of games, he may be that guy behind Maddison. But I think he's not completely match fit. He's never really fit into this Spurs team. But again, this is a new Spurs side that's very attacking under the manager. So, but with that said, I don't think Maddison can be replaced. And this goes across the board, I think, for any team in the Premier League. If you lose a key player, you're going to struggle. Look at Manchester City. They lost De Bruyne, they lost Rodri, 2 key players, and they've been struggling. But their depth allows them to stay in games and win games. In that midfield position, okay, they lose Rodri and De Bruyne, but then you bring in Kovacic, Matheus Nunes, Rico Lewis, Calvin Phillips, who hasn't been great, and I'll mention him later, but City, Arsenal, Liverpool, those types of teams have depth to cover these positions. Spurs, they just don't have that. So they're kind of lacking in that way, and this is where they're going to need luck to win the Premier League. They have to stay relatively healthy. If you go back to when Leicester City won the league, 5,000 to 1, I can probably name you that starting 11 that started 85 to 90% of the games. You're looking at Vardy, Albrighton, Mahrez, Drinkwater, Conte, Danny Simpson, Robert Huth, Wes Morgan, Christian Fuchs, Kasper Schmeichel, and maybe throw Shinji Okazaki in there from time to time. But for the majority of that season, when Leicester won, they stayed healthy, and Claudio Ranieri, their manager at the time, played that team. And a lot of things went their way. including no injuries, no key injuries anyway, for a long period of time. And they had other teams in and around them have off seasons. Liverpool, Arsenal, Manchester City, Manchester United. I mean, the direct competitor that season was Spurs, who had a really good team and probably should have won. But Leicester, like I said, were fantastic, and they stayed relatively healthy, and they were able to win the Premier League. Nothing taken away from Leicester City, but Spurs need that type of luck. Another player that they cannot miss, and they'll miss for a game coming up this weekend against Fulham, is Yves Bissouma, the number 6, the defensive holding midfielder for Spurs. I don't understand how under Conte this guy did not play, because he's showing how good he is. He's showing that Bissouma at Brighton, the reason why Spurs bought him. He's so good. He's calm on the ball. He can dribble past 1, 2, 3 players. He can pick up the ball from the defense, drive down the field, and start attacks for Tottenham. Not many players can do that. Spurs haven't had a player like that probably since Moussa Dembele, who's had that ability to manage the game in the middle of the park, strong on the ball, very calm under pressure, can win the ball back, can win games for you. Bissouma is that guy, and there's no like for like replacement for him either. I mean, you're looking at Oliver Skip, Højbjerg, who comes in and does a job from time to time, but a very different player, Højbjerg. He's more of a defensive player. He shores up the defense. He's not going to beat guys one-on-one. He's not going to draw fouls. This is all what Bissouma does. I would say maybe the player that can replicate Bissouma's play the most is probably Rodrigo Bentancur, who's missed the majority of the season. He underwent surgery because he had a knee injury last year. Similar players, but not exactly the same. I don't know how they both fit in, but with Bentancur coming back, it does provide that midfield position with a bit of cover, but Bissouma needs to be there, and Bentancur, you don't know what player he's going to come back as. For me, Bentancur needs to come back at 80 to 90% of the player that he was to make an impact. It's as simple as that. So it's another spot in this Spurs 11 where they can't afford to lose a player. And I think for me, maybe the two most important players at the moment for Spurs, who cannot go missing for whatever reason, whether it's suspensions or injuries, are the center backs, Christian Romero and Mickey van de Ven. And if you asked me before the season started who are the two most important players for Spurs, I probably wouldn't name those guys. Romero, important, yes, he's a very good center back who's now becoming one of the best center backs in the Premier League. This is a guy that just won a World Cup. Lionel Messi said he's the greatest center back in the world at the moment. I mean, make of that what you will, but there's a reason why he's saying that. It's because he's very good. He's a very aggressive center back. He'll get in your face, tackle you, challenge you. He's all over the pitch. He does everything for this team. And beside him, you have Mickey van de Ven, who's playing his first season in the Premier League, comes over from the German Bundesliga, and is fantastic. And he's like the perfect complement to Christian Romero, where he's very calm. He uses his pace to win balls back under pressure. As I mentioned, he's extremely calm, and he's learning from Romero. And I think Romero has taken on that leadership role with Van de Ven beside him, and they've become one of the best partnerships in the Premier League. But the reason why they can't lose them, outside of their quality and what they've been bringing to the Spurs side, there's no center back depth. Behind Romero and Van de Ven is Eric Dyer. Eric Dyer hasn't played this season. He's on his way out. There's rumors that he's going to Sporting. Jose Mourinho wants him at Roma. I just saw him in a Spurs social media video where they were filming him. He's like, "Oh, you don't have to film me. I know you guys won't use it anyway." So clearly he's mentally checked out. He's also lost a step. You know, he wasn't great last season for Spurs. So that's a big issue. Behind Eric Dyer, you have Ashley Phillips, who has yet to play a minute in the Premier League. A young player who doesn't have this, top tier experience in the England First Division. So that's an issue. You lose one of those center backs, and all of a sudden, I think the rest of the team crumbles. I mean, under this new manager, Ange Postecoglou, they play a very attacking style, and they play a high line. So you need your center backs to have pace. Van de Ven was the 9th fastest player in the Bundesliga last season. Romero's got pace. Pedro Porro and Destiny Udogie, the fullbacks, wingbacks, whatever you want to call them, also have pace. Dyer doesn't have that pace. I'm not quite sure Ashley Phillips has that pace. So you need a specific type of player to fill into that role. Outside of Dyer and Phillips, that's it. You're going to have to look for, a player who can play a majority of positions. And maybe that's Emerson Royale, who hasn't really seen some game time on that right side, but he's not a center back. So it's a big issue. And when you play a high line like that, like I just mentioned, you're prone to mistakes. The ball's going to get in behind you, and you need the pace to make up for that. And Spurs don't have that outside of Van de Ven and Romero. So those two guys are absolutely key to this Spurs side trying to win the Premier League. The sixth guy that I'm throwing on this list, I kind of did it a little bit late, but he's very important, and he's been very good, and that's the goalkeeper, Vicario. Italian keeper, got a call-up. Internationals, by the way, all over this Tottenham field. Argentina, you have Romero. Van de Ven got called up to the Dutch side. Obviously, Son with South Korea. Maddison in England. Kulusevski with Sweden. So really good side Spurs have right now. Vicario's been good, like I mentioned, the goalkeeper. His distribution is pretty good. I thought he made some key saves against Arsenal, against Liverpool, Sheffield United, Manchester United, like I mentioned as well. So he's been in the games for Spurs, and he's kept them out. I mean, like I said, if you're playing this type of system, chances are going to come your way, and you need your keeper to step up, and I felt like he stepped up in a big way. No team across the board wants their number one keeper to go down, because the guy you have behind him is more or less a placeholder and could play in some games if you're in an FA Cup, the early rounds in an FA Cup, League Cup, some Champions League games, Europa League, Conference League games, whatever the case may be. But you don't want him playing week in and week out. That's why you have a number one and a number two. The number two to Vicario is Fraser Forster, who was a goalkeeper in his time, but he's a bit older now, doesn't move as quickly. He's not a guy you want to have between the sticks moving forward. And if Vicario goes down, Spurs are going to have a serious issue with Forster and net. And that's not taking anything away from him. He's just one of those guys. Listen, he's there just in case Vicario goes down and you need a goalie to step in, but he's not the guy that you want to have. Okay, so with that said, those key players, they need to stay healthy. Let's say, this is my second point. We get to January, the January transfer window opens. Spurs absolutely need to be within touching distance of first place. I would say probably 4 to 6 points. And then you're thinking about Daniel Levy and the sporting directors and the managers thinking about, okay, what players do we need now to actually challenge for this title? We're not that far off who we need to bring in. And there's some priorities, like I mentioned, center back depth and probably another striker or a winger. And I've identified some players within the Premier League that Spurs can go after. It's going to cost them some money. But if they're within touching distance, I think they need a third center back. Regardless, actually, if they're in touching distance, they just need that backup cover. And there's three guys that I like. Number one being Mark Gahey from Crystal Palace. He's been called up to England, 23 years old. He's being touted as a guy who could potentially get sold for 50, 60, even 70 million down the line. He's a young center back. He's got pace to him. He's got power. He's already adapted to the Premier League. He starts week in and week out for Crystal Palace. He's going to come at a cost, probably 35 to 40 million. And I don't know if Spurs want to spend that kind of money, but let's not forget, they still have 100 million in the bank that they made from Harry Kane going to Bayern Munich. So the money is there. So he'd be at the top of my list as a player you can get, not only for now, but for the future. Number two would be Max Kilman. I love him. He's the Wolves captain, 26 years old. Similar to Gahey, he's got pace about him. He plays for Wolves week in and week out. Like I mentioned, he's the captain. Would probably cost a little bit less, maybe 20, 25, even 30 million. You might have to pay that Premier League tax, like that English tax that really does exist. You want a Premier League proven player in January, especially, that cost is going to go up. But listen, if you feel like you're in touching distance, you could potentially make a run for that title or even just stay in the top four. These are the types of players you're going to have to buy. And you're going to have to spend that money. And Spurs, I think, need to understand that. And the third one on my list, I think it's doable. It's attainable. And it's Ben Godfrey. And I know he's at Everton and he's been out of favor with the manager. He's not being picked to start. So you can probably get him at a discounted price. He's still relatively young. He'll probably cost you around 10 million, 10, 15 million. He was good with Norwich when Norwich came up a couple seasons ago. I thought he's been good with Everton at times. He can play as a fullback and he can play as a center back. He's just great cover, and he's one of the fastest center backs in the Premier League at the moment. And you're getting him on the cheap, an English player. You're probably not going to have to pay that big of a premium for him, considering he's already kind of on his way out at Everton. I don't think Sean Dyche wants him in his 11. So definitely a player I would look at for Spurs. If you're kind of scraping the bottom of barrel and you're looking for Premier League experience, I think Ben Godfrey is that guy. Another position I look at definitely would be midfield. I think Basuma, Bentancur, Skip, those guys need some cover. I have Calvin Phillips on this list. And I know that's kind of crazy because he rarely plays. Since he moved from Leeds to Manchester City, we haven't seen Calvin Phillips. He's had some injury issues. I don't know if Pep fully fancies him, honestly. He's called him out before for being out of shape, so maybe not the guy you want to target. But we know at the Premier League level, at least with Leeds and the Championship level, he's an excellent midfielder. He's still getting called up to England. There's a reason why Southgate likes him. Maybe he just needs a change of scenery. And maybe Spurs can get him on loan. Another player who's out of favor. Come January, Kevin De Bruyne, who's injured, is coming back. Rodri's back after his suspension. They have Rico Lewis, Matheus Nunes. John Stones can even go into that midfield and cover. So I think he might be the odd man out. And if I'm Spurs, I definitely snoop around and see what you can get him for. Maybe on loan, and you share the cost with Manchester City. And it's not like he's a guy you're going to need to bank on to perform week in and week out. You have those players. This is just cover, and I feel like Phillips can do a job for Spurs. The other player is more backup for James Maddison, and he's also one for the future, and that's Eberechi Eze from Crystal Palace. He'll probably cost a lot more, but he has everything. He can shoot and pass with both feet. Set piece delivery is fantastic. He can manage a game. He creates a ton of chances. Put him on his side with Son and Richarlison and Brendan Johnson and Kulusevski. With those type of attackers in front of him, I think he can do even more. I mean, he's touted as being one of the next best England attacking midfielders. And if I'm Spurs, I look at it. He's going to cost you 50 plus. Easily. Palace are doing relatively well under Roy Hodgson. I don't think they want to let him go. They have so many injuries over there. Michael Olise could be on his way out come January as well. So if I'm Palace, I don't want to lose too many attackers. But if you have a team like Spurs coming and they're like, hey, well, I'll give you 50, 60 million for Eze, it's hard to say no that kind of money. But for Spurs, you got to push for these types of players. And the ones that I have identified are Premier League proven players. Obviously, there's players in different leagues who I'm sure their scouts and sporting directors are looking at. But I feel like if you're making a push for the title and come January, you're within striking distance of first place, then you need to look within your league because you want these players to adapt as quickly as possible. When you're bringing in players from foreign leagues, sometimes it takes some time for players to adapt to the speed of the Premier League, the style, because things change. If you're looking at guys within the league already, maybe that adjustment time is shortened, and I think that's what Spurs would want. Okay, finally, the last thing that needs to happen, and this has to do with luck as well, but Spurs, they need teams to fall off or have uncharacteristic seasons. You need one or two. I would say you need two of Manchester City, Arsenal, Liverpool, and I feel like Manchester United already dropped off, and Newcastle. So two of those 4 or 5 teams need to have poor seasons. I feel like United's already having that, but they aren't really in contention or never really been in contention anyway for first place. I think it's Arsenal and City. Arsenal and City probably need to drop off quite a bit for Spurs to even have a chance here. And this is the luck that I mentioned that Leicester City had. They took advantage of that situation. City, Arsenal, Liverpool, Manchester United, even Chelsea that season when Leicester won had uncharacteristic seasons. It was down to Spurs and Leicester City took advantage and won that and won the Premier League. And for Spurs to make this happen after this fantastic start early on, they need to hope that, one, they play well. 2, they stay relatively healthy and win the games that they need to win. But you need teams around you to fall off or you absolutely have no chance. Do I think, personally, that they can actually challenge and win the Premier League? No. If you look at the depth of their squad compared to Liverpool, Manchester City, and Arsenal, there's no comparison. There's a reason why these teams win, and it's because they have multiple players in multiple positions to do a job and go on an entire season and win. And when it comes to Manchester City, they still exist. And when it comes time to win, when January hits, they get De Bruyne back, they just know what to do, and it's full throttle, right? It's pedal to the metal. That's what Manchester City do. So as long as Manchester City exists with Pep Guardiola, it's going to be difficult for any team to win the Premier League. But this season, especially when you have so many good teams, City, Arsenal, Liverpool, like I mentioned, it's been a great season so far for Spurs, but they need a lot of luck to go their way if they want to win the Premier League.